Hello, welcome back. Another Wednesday Bible study with Pastor Mark from the Word of Life Fellowship Church here in Omaha, Nebraska. Today, we're going to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and maybe another place or two, but the book of Ecclesiastes is an interesting book. When you read it, if you read it beginning to end, at least I get the sense that the writer, which was Solomon, king of Israel, according to the Lord, the wisest man that ever lived on the earth. And it's kind of negative. And I think when you look at it, from beginning to end, I believe you'll see, I'm talking about the whole book of Ecclesiastes, you begin to see that the things that he thought were probably going to be important, he begins to realize they're not in the scheme of the realm of, in the context of eternity. Once this life is over, in fact, he calls in several occasions, depends on the translation you're reading, but he calls it an evil. That's something you've worked for your whole life. You die, don't even get to enjoy it, and someone else who doesn't really appreciate it comes along and they have what you worked so hard to attain. And that is true. Most of what we reach for, we strive for, we work for in this life, it doesn't really matter in the end. We feel like it's important. It's important enough to really put our efforts in and really dedicate time and resources to achieve. But in the end, it doesn't matter. The King James Version says it's vanity, vanity, all is vanity. Some other translations use the phrase chasing after the wind. It's like chasing after the wind. So if you were running, trying to catch the wind, it's a waste of time. You can't do it. Even if you're caught in the middle of the wind, you can't grab it. It's not something you can hold. And that is what Solomon is trying to say. You can't hold on to it. Think about old tombs that have been unearthed and found over the years in archaeological digs. In some cases, wealthy people or kings, rulers, have actually had slaves and horses and dogs and cats and their favorite things, money, grain, even honey in pots put into their tombs because they believed and hoped they could take them with them into the next life. Folks, that means they had to kill those servants, those horses, those dogs, those cats. They killed them and buried them in these graves with these people who hoped and thought they could take it into the next life, and you can't. Today, in looking at this chapter, Ecclesiastes chapter 9 in particular, there are some things in it. I'm going to have to put my glasses on for a second. Forgive me, there will be a glare off the lenses. I can't seem to help that. So I'm reading from the Good News translation today. And chapter 9, Ecclesiastes, verse 11. This is probably going to surprise some of you, but then as you think about it, I think you're going to understand that it makes sense. This is Solomon speaking. I realized another thing, that in this world, fast runners do not always win the races, and the brave do not always win the battles. The wise do not always earn a living, Intelligent people do not always get rich, and capable people do not always rise to high positions. Bad luck happens to everybody. Now, the New King James translation reads the same verse as follows. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill, but time and chance happens to them all. I like the way the Good News Translation words that. One of the things he says, incapable people do not always rise to high positions. Have you ever worked with somebody that was just great at their job and they just had a grasp of the entire organization, if you please, and yet they were still low on the totem pole, so to speak, in the hierarchy in the company? And people high up the ladder would actually come to them for questions, counsel, advice, but they didn't promote them. They didn't raise them up to their level. I've seen that. I think some of you have too. Some of you may have been that person. Maybe you are that person. Sometimes it's just the way it is. We don't like it. Solomon observed it, and he's like, sometimes it just happens. I've seen races, like Olympic-style races, maybe in the heats, as they call it, when they're qualifying for the actual medal race. And they're talking about this person who's got such fast times and this and that. And maybe it's the high hurdles or something, and they're in line to maybe break the world record, and there's a lot of hype and excitement about it. And then in one of the heats, meaning the qualifying races, they have to track certain times. They have to clock certain times in order to make the race that actually will count for the medal. And they hit the hurdle wrong and fall down. And they get a rotten time. And now they aren't even competing in the gold medal race. I've seen things like that. I saw it's been a few Olympics ago, and Michael Phelps, the swimmer, was taking the Olympics by storm in his swimming skill. And he beat another man, and both of them had beat the world record, if I'm remembering this correctly. Both of those swimmers beat the previous world record time. I kind of felt sorry for that second man, because if Michael Phelps would not have been in the pool, that guy not only gets the gold medal, but he gets the world record, at least until someone else breaks it. Sometimes it's just bad timing. What am I saying here? At the end of our lives, the only things that really matter are what we did for the Lord. It's not going to matter who had the best and largest home. It's not going to matter who had the most expensive car or the most rare automobile, the most jewelry or the most expensive jewelry, or the most unique painting. Who had the best and largest savings account? Whose retirement plan was the best? That's not going to matter. Who had the cleanest house? I'll tell you what, folks, you would have thought my mom and my grandmother, her mother, were competing in world competition for the world's cleanest house. I've seen my mother hold her hand up and stop repairmen at the door before they came in to service whatever was out in the house, be it dishwasher, water heater, wash machine, whatever, and say, take off your boots. Now, it wasn't a request. She was not asking them politely, hey, would you think about that? No, she was telling them, take off your boots. And I saw one time, I recall, the guy says, lady, I'm not taking off my boots. Shut that door right in his face. She turned around, headed for the yellow pages. Now, you folks under the age of 30, you don't even know what that means. That was what we looked at before there was such a thing as internet search. The yellow pages were our internet search. I've seen that. My mom wanted a clean house, and she had it. Her mother as well. It isn't going to matter in eternity who had the cleanest house. It's not going to matter when we stand before God at the end, and we will stand before God at the end. It's not going to matter who had the most wealth or the most rare piece of whatever, or whatever it is that people strive for and work for and dedicate time for in this life, unless it's something lasting, something that's going to matter, something that God thinks about and considers. These things are temporary that we waste our time with in this life. I said it. We waste our time seeking after things that just won't matter. So that wonderful piece of artwork that is worth a lot of money. Hey, I like watching Antiques Roadshow on public television just as much as anyone probably. And you see all these people there with all these artifacts, and sometimes it's just something that Aunt Betty had that was just a family keepsake. But every now and then, there's something in there that is absolutely remarkable. But who's holding it? Who's appraising its value? Is it the person that worked so hard to get it, to make it, to obtain it the first time? No, they couldn't take it with them. And that's what Solomon is talking about. It's like chasing after the wind. It's a waste. It's a waste. These temporary things. You see, they remain here in this life. And somebody else is going to get it. And Solomon said, you can read, if you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you'll see it. And depending on your translation that you're reading in, sometimes he'll say, this is an evil thing. This is rotten. Because someone worked so hard to get and obtain, and somebody else gets to use it. They don't even get to enjoy it. Matthew chapter 6, verses 20 and 21, Jesus says, to lay up treasure in heaven, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. He also says in the same chapter, the 33rd verse, Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, to seek his kingdom first. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And then Jesus says, and all these things shall be added unto you. What are these things? Well, when you read Matthew chapter 6, in particular, the last probably 4, 5, 6 verses, you'll find he says, don't worry about what to eat, what to drink, where you're going to sleep, where you're going to live, what kind of clothes you're going to put on. We spend a lot of our lives worrying about all those things and working for all those things. There's a verse in Ecclesiastes. I wish I had it in front of me right now. I'd give you the chapter and verse. But Solomon writes, a person works their entire life. One translation says, for their mouth. Another says for their belly. Most of our lives are spent finding something to eat, buying something to eat, going somewhere to get something to eat, because we have to have the nourishment to have energy so that we can continue living in this life. But it's not permanent. Seek Him first and His kingdom, and all these things will be added to you. God will make sure that you have what to eat, what to drink, where to live, what to wear, and I believe also transportation to go back and forth, because in this world we live in today, you need transportation. We don't work in our own backyard typically, or just around the corner. Now, in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, toward the end of the book, in the last two verses 13 and 14 of Ecclesiastes chapter 12, reading from the New International Version right now. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. So Solomon is saying everything he said up to this point, and talking about things like chasing after the wind, this is a waste of time, this is an evil, etc. Forgive the glare on my glasses, please. He says, this is the conclusion, here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God, meaning reverence God. Give God His due, His respect. Fear God and keep His commandments. For this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Do these things. Earlier in this chapter, I love the way that this translation says it. Verses 6 and 7 are one big sentence, so I'm going to read it. Ecclesiastes 12, verses 6 and 7 in the New International Version. Remember Him before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from. He's talking about us. He's talking about the human body before we return to dust. And the spirit returns to God who gave it. Remember Him before these things happen. In chapter 9, in the grave, he says in the grave, we don't have that opportunity to then turn our lives to God. We can't do anything for Him then. Our life is over. It's come to an end. This, Pastor Mark, this is a downer. Pastor Mark, this is all negative. You're making me sad. I'm thinking about the end. Well, that's kind of the point here. Focusing on things that matter while we can, and giving God His due, and not worrying about these things that are so temporary and really just don't matter. When you pass from this life, you're probably not going to have on your tombstone, you had the fastest car in high school. Probably not going to be there. Was the most popular girl on the cheerleading squad. It's probably not going to be there. Why? Because at the time of our life, that seemed like an important thing. But really, getting better grades and preparing ourselves for a better job in our life was probably a little bit more important than that. But even that isn't significant in eternity, unless God uses you in some way to save people's lives. I'll give you an example. Dr. Jonas Salk, I believe, is who found the cure for the disease polio. Untold numbers of people were maimed and died from that disease. And Dr. Salk's discovery saved countless millions. That we'll let the Lord sort that out, but that's probably going to weigh a little better in counting versus whether or not I caught the largest fish on a fishing trip with my friends. You see what I'm saying? Focus on the things that matter. And sort the other stuff where it belongs. But keep him first. Seek him first and his righteousness. And he will add all of these other things that we worry about every day. Well, God bless you. I hope this was a blessing to you today. And I hope that in some way, in hearing this and reading these passages, you too will be edified and find inspiration to do something great for God. Well, God bless you. Hope to see you this Sunday, 10:30 at the Hilton, the True by Hilton, 72nd and Haskell in Omaha, Nebraska. God bless you. Have a great day.